discussion, climate engagement, as we now move down the path to COP28 in the Emirates. And the preparatory work for these negotiations every year become more and more complex and more engaged. Again, speaking to the importance of this gathering. And in COP28, significant deliverables on all of the negotiating tracks. And the discussions, the breakout sessions over these past couple of days touched on all of these. So whether it is on the area of mitigation and the needing to close the ambition gap and the emissions gap there, the call for greater efforts across the board was clearly heard. Whether on adaptation, the need for greater support on the adaptation agenda, and as we know, the less that we mitigate is the more that countries, especially those that are most vulnerable and exposed to climate impacts, have to do on the adaptation side, and the need for greater means of implementation in supporting that agenda. And of course, the area of finance, we know that we're not where we need to be in terms of mobilizing the $100 billion, and the need this year to resolve that with a very clear political demonstration, or the need for a clear political demonstration as early as possible this year as to how that financing gap will be closed. And again, on the finance side, responding to the calls from both Glasgow and Sharm el-Sheikh on the reform and the need for the multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, to evolve, to respond more effectively to the climate challenge. Loss and damage. This year, an important year in the operationalization of the fund and funding arrangements in addressing loss and damage, and parties' views on the road ahead there. And then the overarching piece with the global stocktake, that is the key deliverable for COP28. That reflection on that backward look in terms of where we are, again, where we're not, but again, a consensus across the board that we already know where we are, and the need to focus on the forward-looking piece and how the global community responds to that stock take, and calls for a roadmap to chart the path forward for the course correction that is needed so that that global effort is 1.5 aligned, Paris aligned. So it just leaves me to say that an important year, and every COP is important, but there is special significance to all that needs to be delivered in this coming period. And for me to thank our gracious hosts, and to Dan and the incoming and current presidency in organizing this important milestone meeting on the road to COP28. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. The IPCC synthesis report, as my good friend Simon has just highlighted, which was released yesterday, is yet another sobering testament about the magnitude and gravity of the climate crisis. IPCC told us what we already know. However, it further detailed the situation at every region and every sector. We are clearly off track. The 1.5 degrees might slip away. The adaptation window is closing rapidly. Losses and damage are becoming a hallmark of our present reality. I quote the UN Secretary General when he said, "Climate action is needed at all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once." This is the only viable opportunity before humankind to reverse the grinding trend and survive this existential threat. Against this backdrop, close to 50 climate ministers and envoys met here for the second time at the Copenhagen Climate Ministerial. Our convening was the first since COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and it is also the first high-level meeting on the road to COP28 in the United Arab Emirates. I was pleased to co-chair this ministerial consultations for the second time, and I am very appreciative of the leadership, hospitality, and support provided by Minister Jorgensen and the Danish government. My presence here side by side with COP28 President-designate during the meetings is an unequivocal signal to unity of purpose and a continued commitment. COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh and its Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan stands for the shift towards a new era of urgently needed solutions and implementation. The general spirit in Sharm was less talk, less empty promises, and more concrete deliverables on the ground at scale and speed. It was a sound call for a grand bargain for climate supported by a solid partnership between nations, private sector, civil society, and other relevant stakeholders. Several key and historic breakthroughs were obtained in Sharm el-Sheikh in a victory for multilateralism and international cooperation. At COP27, parties established the new funding arrangements and a fund to respond to loss and damage, adopted a new work program on mitigation, maintained the call for new and updated NDCs to keep the 1.5 degree within reach. It reaffirmed the imperative of the concept of just transition through a first ever work program, agreed on a framework on the road to a credible outcome on the global goal on adaptation, called for honoring the long overdue symbolic $100 billion commitment while reforming the IFIs and MDBs with a view of ensuring that climate finance is appropriate, sufficient, accessible, and concessional for developing countries. As COP President, I continue to diligently follow up on this work and urge parties to work together. This weekend, the Egyptian city of Luxor will be hosting the first meeting of the Transitional Committee on Loss and Damage. Whilst my satisfaction with these major outcomes of Sharm el-Sheikh, notwithstanding a moment of great difficulty for the international community as a whole and a thread of overlapping crises and cascading risks, I am firmly convinced that much more needs to be done, and thus a heavy lifting on the road to COP28 in the UAE and beyond. We need to operationalize Sharm el-Sheikh's outcomes and demonstrate more ambitious action. Our action should be measured by responding to best available science while honoring the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities under the Convention and its Paris agreements. I'd like to thank my colleague and good friend Dan for the hospitality and generosity and his excellent leadership in conducting these ministerials. I think they have had an impact. I benefited from them last year in preparations of my presidency, and I'm sure that they set the tone for greater cooperation, greater understanding, and a common will to address the very challenging climate crisis that we face. Thank you.
Now for the final statement by Danish Minister for Development, Cooperation and Global Climate Policy, Mr. Dan Jørgensen.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for those kind words, and thank you so much for your leadership. Not only was Sharm el-Sheikh instrumental in making decisions that we've waited for a very long time and that are now there to be implemented, you've also pointed for a way forward from there, so thank you so much for that. I am of course very honored to have been able to host the Copenhagen Climate Ministerial and to have welcomed prominent climate ministers and key decision makers to Copenhagen again this year. Together with colleagues from more than 40 countries, we have over the last 2 days reaffirmed our commitment to follow up on the COP27 decisions and drive progress towards COP28 in Dubai later this year. COP28 will, in my opinion, be the most important COP since Paris. The IPCC and the UN Secretary General warned us yesterday that the climate crisis is on the brink of spinning out of control. Time is running out and action is needed. It is a promising sign from the ministerial here in Copenhagen that no participants disputed the need to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030 in order to keep the 1 target degree alive. The discussions at the Copenhagen Climate Ministerial have highlighted several areas of particular concern in order to reach a successful COP28. I would in particular like to highlight the need to reach agreement on the following. First, we need to deliver on our promise to get on track of 1.5 degrees. To this end, more ambitious NDCs are needed, and we simply need to agree on a commitment to phase out unabated fossil fuels. This should be replaced, among other things, by approximately 1,000 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity every year. Second, the climate crisis is a fact. This also entails that more attention needs to be cast on the need for increasing adaptation action, including access to adaptation finance for the most vulnerable countries. Third, we need to operationalize the new funding arrangements responding to loss and damage caused by climate change. We need to find funding solutions, and we need to do it fast. Fourth and last, the global mobilization of climate finance, we need to mobilize financing on a scale to enable the green transformation, not least in Africa. And the developed countries should of course deliver on mobilizing the $100 billion that has been agreed upon. In our view, these vital issues should be a part of the global stocktake, which will be concluded at COP28. The global stocktake should both ensure that the countries have a shared understanding of the status of the Paris Agreement and, even more importantly, inform parties in enhancing action and international cooperation across the board. With those words, thank you very much.
And now we open the floor to questions. We have about 10 minutes.
Olaf Christensen, Danish TV2. Mr. COP President, you said that the 1.5 target is in danger of slipping away. And you, Mr. Jorgensen, you mentioned that nobody among the ministers have disputed the need to keep the 1.5. But have any of you at this meeting heard any country commit itself to reducing its emissions so that we can actually get on the path to what you're talking about, a sustainable development?
Well, undoubtedly, maybe participants didn't particularly divulge what they are undertaking in maintaining the 1.5 degree, and necessarily that would entail reduction of emissions. But certainly they all spoke about the importance of maintaining 1.5, and thereby subsequently the only way to do that is through the reduction of emissions in terms of revising and enhancing their NDCs, and effectively not only doing that in terms of their national programs, but also providing the finance and facilities that would enable others who are less capable of providing those resources so as to undertake their common but differentiated responsibilities. So I think there was a consensus on the need to take immediate and impactful action to maintain the 1.5, and we expect that that will be translated into effective measures, policies, and legislation.
Maybe I can add to that quite a few European countries argued that the EU needs to increase the ambitions in our common NDC. Right now it states that we will reduce our emissions by at least 55%, But actually, if we look at the legislation that's been negotiated within the last year, we have results that would indicate that we can go further than that and have a higher reduction target than that. In Denmark, of course, we've also decided recently that we will increase our ambitions so that we will move forward the target on becoming carbon neutral to 2045, and in 2050 we will be a carbon negative country, meaning that we have to reduce our emissions by 110%.
Hi, Louise Rasmussen from Reuters. Is there any consensus coming together on what shape the reformation of the climate financing system should take?
Well, again, this is an area that was highlighted during various interventions. I can't say that during these meetings there was a particular formulation of what that constitutes. And of course this also depends on the institutions themselves and their the parties that contribute to those institutions and the degree of their willingness to undertake the necessary reform. But it is a growing request by a very large proportion of the parties and participants, and I believe it should be addressed within the context of those institutions and their governing bodies.
I can add to that I also heard many parties argue today and yesterday that they feel there's a window of opportunity right now with regards to reform of the MDBs, especially of course the World Bank, and that we need a greening of the bank, meaning that the aim of the bank should no longer be focused only on poverty reduction, even though the elimination of poverty is still a main focus, obviously, for the World Bank. It should also be the case that in the future the bank will look much more on fighting climate change and on climate adaptation issues. Also, we had many discussions on innovative sources of finance. So whereas the MDBs is a discussion that's relevant here, but where decisions will be made elsewhere, maybe in the future we can have decisions in the COP process on innovative sources of finance. And my own country has put forward a proposal, at least for discussion, that maybe you could put a levy on bunker fuels in the shipping sector. Other countries have also supported that. I also heard parties saying a taxation levy on fossil fuels, taxation on plane tickets, things like that. In any case, I think it is important to realize that right now we're discussing how to mobilize $100 billion. That has not been possible. Frankly speaking, that is actually an embarrassment, since we know that 100 billion won't even cut it. We need trillions.
And now I will be reading a question on behalf of Frank Jordans from the AP. In response to the latest IPCC report, the UN Secretary General called for an acceleration agenda where the developed countries would commit to reaching net zero as close as possible to 2040, while emerging economies would commit to reaching net zero as close as possible to 2050. Which of these countries meeting in Copenhagen support those targets, and if not, why not?
Should we answer for all 45 countries? Probably a little bit difficult. Do you want to?
Well, again, I can't say that there was a specific answer to the aspirational goals that the Secretary General has conveyed. They reflect the magnitude of the crisis, the importance of parties fulfilling the ambitions and elevating their ambitions necessarily to meet the challenge of climate change and to be impactful. These goals will be, I'm sure, addressed within the national context and within the national abilities. And thereby, I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone, but I can speak on behalf of Egypt, that we are doing everything possible in terms of our energy mix and have elevated our ambitions so that by 2035 we might be able to achieve 42 or 43% in renewable energies. I think that is an accomplishment that has been achieved within a very short time frame. and we anticipate that we might overshoot that ambition because of the technology that is developing, but here we rely on the transfer of technology from our friends and partners, among them Denmark and others, who would be willing to transfer that technology readily and provide us the opportunity to even extend further our ambition. So again, this is an ongoing process, one where we can only incentivize and encourage everyone to do their role. We can only live together or perish together.
I can only add to that maybe our collaboration as countries bilaterally is an example that others might find inspiring, because if we are to solve this huge challenge that is referred to in the question, which basically is just quoting what the science tells us is necessary, we need a transfer of technology, goes without saying, but we also need to start collaborating in different ways, and all parties, all countries on the planet needs to stop seeing this as a zero-sum game. We need to be aligned, and we need to know that all technology is developed, even though sometimes it's tempting to keep them for yourself because that gives you a competitive advantage. All technologies needs to be deployed as broadly as possible, as fast as possible.
Hello, Rasmus Svaneborg from Danish Climate Monitor. Did you discuss the possibility of changing the phrasing of phasing down coal to phasing down fossil fuels? And did you get any indication on whether that's possible in this COP28?
I think there's a general recognition of the importance of reducing the reliance on fossil fuels and being able to transition towards renewable energy, clean energy. Again, this has to be taken in perspective of what constitutes a just transition. So these are areas that are important, that will continue to be subjects of consultations and deliberations, and we hope that a consensus will continue to be formulated and advanced in the process of the UNCCC.
There's no doubt that it will be a part of the discussion moving forward towards COP28. Right now, as a result of Glasgow, COP26, there is a formulation in the Glasgow Pact saying that we need to phase down unabated coal. That led to some parties, including primarily India, arguing last year at COP27 that why not expand that, so instead of only referring to coal, we refer to all fossils. My own country definitely supports that. I think there was a big group of countries, some say more than 80, that supported that in Sharm. Whether or not we will reach that result in Dubai later this year is of course difficult to say, but I think we can say for sure that it will be a part of the conversation.
Now I will be reading a question on behalf of Camille Bass-Volet from the AFP. What signal does the ministerial send? What work is required politically to assure success of COP28? Can it send a wrong message that the meeting will be held in an oil-producing country when we need to phase down fossil fuels?
As I mentioned, I think this ministerial and those that have preceded it have been very instrumental in setting the stage and providing an opportunity for parties to develop their positions and to listen to those of others. So there is a value added to this process that we have all appreciated. And what happens in terms of from now until COP28 is a reinforcement. There are several junctures at which further ministerials will be convened. The Petersburg Dialogue as an example that provides us more opportunity to address the various issues and to hopefully bridge the gaps and find the necessary points of convergence. I believe that convening in the United Arab Emirates and the commitment that has been demonstrated by the President-designate, and again the importance of not diverting from the objective at hand. There is a political commitment on the part of the United Arab Emirates to lead this process with all it entails, that it is a oil-producing country does not in any way detract. There are areas that can be of benefit to the process by highlighting the scaling down of dependency on fossil fuels and the efforts that have been taken in that regard. I believe the UK is a major oil producer as well. That did not deviate or create the narrative that only deflects the attention from the issue at hand. So I think all COPs should concentrate on the climate crisis rather than on peripheral issues that don't really have an impact on the process itself.
I would also say that if we are to be in alignment with the Paris Agreement and reduce emissions so that we stay below 1.5 degrees, which is what we all want, we need all countries of the planet to contribute. And we definitely also need all producing countries to be a part of the solution. There is no solution if that is not the case. I think that is probably the main argument. Second, if you listen to the COP president designate and what he's actually said in speeches and elsewhere, he's made it very clear that he will applaud the day that the last barrel of oil is sold. So basically, in my opinion, what we are in dire need to engage in is a dialogue on what that managed transition needs to look like. Because His Excellency Shoukry is right in saying that this is also a question about just transition in many countries of the world. So we've started to address this when speaking about coal. There's been a lot of work done in the previous years on helping countries that are moving away from coal from the international community, and maybe it's time to also look at what can be done in that regard when also discussing other fossils.
Christina Hovland, Altinget. Regarding the finance for fund of loss and damage, what specific ideas have been on the table and discussed, and where does the party stand at this moment?
I think further elaboration on these issues will commence with the meeting of the committee that will be convened in Luxor next week. It will give an opportunity for that process to further elaborate. There are various ideas and opinions as regards. I think what is important is that we focus on what is manageable, what is impactful, how we can operationalize this important mechanism because it addresses the lives and livelihoods of multitudes of people who are suffering on an almost daily basis from the climate crisis, who have been impacted, who have lost lives, and who are certainly worthy of compensation and support. So what is important is the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, and that it should obtain the resources necessary to meet the challenges that exist.
That's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
That was a press conference for Foreign Minister Shoukry, who participated in the first meeting of Copenhagen ministerial meeting on climate that is held under joint Egyptian Emirati chairmanship. During this conference, the foreign minister reviewed the most important achievements during COP27 conference. He also, Shoukry, presided over the session tackling the file of climate action, saying that this action is the cornerstone of efforts of facing the climate changes, especially in the developing countries. And also at the press conference following the conclusion of the Copenhagen meeting, Shoukry said time is no luxury with the escalation of climate change repercussions. He said the recommendations of Sharm el-Sheikh conference must be implemented, adding that $100 million must be collected to implement climate goals, adding that more work is needed to be concluded before the coming UAE climate conference COP28. Dear viewers, a short break and we'll be back with our programs, so stay tuned.